We are AlcoDigital. We sell and training and equipment for people to incorporate in-house alcohol and drug testing in the workplace. In the training, we offer policy advice, best practice procedure, and then keep you updated with relevant laws and regulations so that you're always updated with the policy and the laws that relate to it. What I'm going to talk about today is a new drug driving law that is relevant to your policies. 13% of all working people admit to taking drugs, so they do work for somebody. There is a need to have this policy in place as a deterrent. And then for those of you that don't have testing, hopefully you'll get some information today that will show like the best practice for testing in a workplace to add that higher deterrent. With the wordings of policies, obviously people get picked on, so you can have the best evidence to prove that someone has taken an illegal substance, but what they can do in a tribunal process is pick on you for the wording of your policy. So we will help you get that right so that you can save time in tribunals and that sort of thing. How I'm going to show you this today is with the new drug driving law. So it was introduced in March 2015, and it put a limit on a list of drugs that you cannot now drive on. Now the police did originally have a policy in place that was, you could never drive on drugs before, but it was all based down to impairment and the word impairment. So I'm going to show you this now. So if this many people are working for somebody and admit to taking drugs, how do you want to find that out? Do you want to know about the people that take it full stop, or do you also want to know about those that are impaired at the workplace by these drugs? Because I'm sure it's about 90% of us that actually drink alcohol, but we don't take it at the workplace. And then between 8 to 14 million working days are lost each year. So how many of these hours and days in your company, whether it be from absenteeism, re-employment after dismissal processes, the time consumption in dismissal process, we can help you eliminate that time by having a really good policy and testing in place. So I'll just show you this quick video so that this will show you what the new law is all about.
From the 2nd of March 2015, there will be a new drug driving law in England and Wales. The new law sets limits at very low levels for 8 illegal drugs, such as cannabis and cocaine, to tackle illegal drug use and driving. The law also includes 8 medicines that are sometimes abused, with higher limits to reflect their use as medicines. If you are taking your medicine as directed and your driving is not impaired, then you are not breaking the law. It will remain an offence to drive while your ability is impaired by drugs, and if in doubt, you should not drive. To find out more, ask your doctor or a pharmacist.
It has been in place now for over a year, so we do have some results back from this new law being in place. When the law was about impairment, as you saw that law still applies, only 80% of those arrested at the roadside were actually convicted of drug driving. With the new testing in place and the new limits and the policy actually being, well, the law being that if you have a trace of this drug in your system, yes or no, now 98% of those arrested at the roadside are now convicted. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because this absolutely relates to the transport industry. If you test somebody for drug and they are positive and your policy says you have no tolerance to illegal substances, rather than if you're impaired at work or you use drugs in the workplace, things that you can't actually prove, if there's a trace found, it's gross misconduct, then you're going to have a much easier process of whether it is gross misconduct and what your consequences are of having that substance in your system. There won't be any debate. It's there, we found a trace, and that's why the new law has been so good for the police, and it can work well for you as well. And it also has a higher deterrent, so the new generation is very much against drink driving. If you ask a lot of them, they're aware of the law. We've been drilled into it with campaigns like Think and Break. But with the new drug driving law, hopefully the same will apply to the next generation of drivers. And again, it's just a matter of putting it in place in your workplace now, and if it is going to take a bit of time, at least it's there and it's a starting point, and we will all get there. And again, it saves on your costs, so you're not going to have the extortionate costs of tribunal processes. I think it cost someone I knew about £2,000 just because they believed somebody to have smoked cannabis in the workplace, whereas it wouldn't cost that at all if you had testing to prove it. So these are the list of the drugs that now have limits. as you can see, there's prescription medications on there. So what does that mean for your drivers that are on prescription medications? Well, if they carry their prescription on them and they're taking the drug in line with the medication that the doctor's provided for them, then they'll be absolutely fine. As long as, you know, they're not impaired by that drug. If they showed signs, then the police wouldn't mind if they had that prescription. However, how many of you have been self-prescribed, you know, you've taken a bit extra, or you've saved the drug because you thought, oh, I'll save it for a rainy day, or a colleague said to you, here, I've got codeine that will help with that back problem. We've all got good intentions to just help each other out, but now those drivers would be committing an offence if they were caught to have that drug in their system without a prescription. You know what, I admit that this is just something that is very light. You know, we all make mistakes and things, and it's not about catching your drivers out for doing it, but make them aware. They could lose their licence to this, and they could lose their job, obviously, consequently. The other thing on here is things like codeine. So codeine all over the counter is absolutely fine. The limits are set to a point of, you know, prescribed medications, but they are chosen for a reason, and that is that they do have possibilities of causing impairment. And if you read the side effects of the drugs, they'll say things like, you know, if you feel dizziness and sickness, your employees are drivers, that they need to get paid, they need to go to work. So if they feel those symptoms, they might not feel comfortable telling you, or, you know, not going to work that day. So again, this is just an awareness thing. You know, you can use your policy and testing to say, you know, we're just going to have a toolbox talk here and say that there's a new law in place. Have you guys talked to your doctors? Have you told them what you do for a living? And just make sure that you carry it around with you, and just so that you know, please don't give that drug to anybody else, because that is a new offence. So just to summarise with the policy notes then, so for all of you particularly that are reviewing policies or are about to put one in place, avoid using the word impairment. It's fine if you're using it descriptively to say that drugs and alcohol can cause impairment, but when it comes to the procedure that you're about to state, you know, you want to talk about how you've got a no tolerance to illegal substances, and testing will be in place to discover that and what the consequences are. Specify the equipment you're using. So the police use saliva tests at the roadside. The reason they choose saliva tests at the roadside is because it's the most relevant to a blood test, and these limits are set on blood samples. It's also because saliva will detect drugs that were taken roughly in the last 5 minutes, you know, so recent consumption, and in their system 12, max 48 hours later. A urine test will detect drugs that were taken 7 days ago, in some cases more, but more importantly, it can't actually always detect drugs taken in the first few hours. So if you did a urine test but didn't specify that you use urine tests, your employee can actually go and do their own lab saliva test, blood test, and therefore the results might not match up. If you've not specified which equipment you're using, then they can do that. If you specify it, then they can't. They have to do the same process. I'm running out of time, but I'd be more than happy to kind of cover that in more detail if you do use one or the other, but as most of you said, you don't actually have equipment in place at the moment. I think what's really happening though is that because the police are using saliva tests at the roadside, you don't want your employees to pass your test and then fail the police roadside test. So there is kind of a shift happening now where the transport industry is more using saliva tests for in-house testing. For alcohol, specify the limits. Despite the police specifying limits on blood samples, you don't actually have to say that. You can have a no tolerance to illegal substances. They are illegal drugs at the end of the day, so any trace found can be gross misconduct. But with alcohol, because you're using a breathalyzer, you will need to specify what your no tolerance is. You can have a no tolerance to alcohol in the workplace with results over a 2 microgram limit or something along those lines. Have a fair testing process. I mean, I'm sure 95% of your employees are drivers. Include the other 5%, you know, and once you're happy with your procedure, that it's fair and the policy is fair, that means when you test a management and maybe they get a positive, let's hope not, you treat that the same way you would as a new employee, because you're happy that the process you're using is fair and accurate. Processes for testing as well. One of the great things about in-house testing is that you can do random for-cause pre-employment tests whenever you need to, because it's there, and it will have a high deterrent because of that. If you do a post-incident, you can rule out whether alcohol and drugs was the cause of that incident. If you do pre-employment, you're setting the standard and culture of your company. We do testing, we do believe that our policies should be followed. You know, it's not just a piece of paper. And random, if you outsource, you can call somebody in and do everybody in one day. But if you've got the equipment on site, you can do one person every day, different time of day, different day of the week. The deterrent is always there. And those employees that aren't getting tested will be more likely thinking, you know, I didn't get tested today, so I might get tested tomorrow. So that's what you really want in place, not I got tested, now I can relax and do whatever I want. So obviously I've bombarded you a little bit, but I hope you've got some notes to take away. And like I said, I'll be over there to answer any of your questions later today. But thank you for listening.